There is a particular quality to the smell of someone else's charcoal burning in your backyard. It is not the smell of a pleasant afternoon. It is not the smell of a neighborhood cookout drifting over the fence. It is the specific, identifying smell of an assumption. The assumption that your property, your space, your carefully maintained piece of coastline belongs to someone else's Saturday afternoon in a way that required no conversation, no permission, no acknowledgement that the man whose name is on the deed might have thoughts about the matter. I parked my truck on the access road and sat with the windows down for a moment before I got out. I could hear music. I could hear laughter. I could count, from where I sat, 4 vehicles in my driveway that I had never seen before. I could see, through the open gate I had installed myself 11 years ago, the smoke rising from my stone fire pit in the shape of a celebration I had not been invited to. I got out of the truck. I walked through my gate, and I stood in my own backyard and looked at 11 people I had never met helping themselves to a Saturday afternoon that was not theirs to have. My name is Douglas Merritt. I am 68 years old. I live in Savannah, Georgia, and I have owned a beach house on Tybee Island for 11 years. I purchased it after I retired from the Army Corps of Engineers, where I spent 31 years designing coastal infrastructure, which meant that when I finally had the resources to own a piece of coastline, I understood exactly what I was buying and exactly what it was worth. What it was worth was more than I am going to describe tonight, but it was considerable. Welcome to Dad's True Emotions. Settle in and stay with me because tonight I am going to take you somewhere real. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. You are exactly where you need to be. My son Nathan is 38 years old. He married a woman named Priscilla 4 years ago at a wedding I paid for in full because that is what I had offered, and because Nathan was happy and Priscilla seemed, at the time, like a person who would grow into the relationship and into our family with the natural progression of someone being welcomed genuinely. I had given Nathan and Priscilla a key to the Tybee house 18 months into the marriage. It was a gesture of trust, the kind fathers make when they believe the people they are trusting deserve the trust. The gesture came with a simple and unstated expectation, the kind that should not require stating, that the key was for Nathan and Priscilla for their use when they wanted a weekend at the beach. Not for their use as a general-purpose hospitality infrastructure, for Priscilla's extended family on summer Saturdays. The family gathered in my backyard that afternoon was Priscilla's. Her parents, Raymond and Glenda, whom I had met twice at family events. Her sister and brother-in-law. 3 cousins I had never encountered. 2 people who appeared to be neighbors or friends of the cousins, which is to say people with no connection to me whatsoever. And a man named Otto who was grilling on my stone fire pit with the focused satisfaction of someone who has found a grill he prefers to his own. Priscilla was there. Nathan was not. He was in Savannah, I would learn later, working on a project at his firm on a Saturday, unaware that his wife had issued a standing summer invitation to her family using a key that I had given him for a different purpose. I walked into the backyard and I looked at Raymond, who was the first to see me and who had the specific reaction of a man deciding whether to brazen through a situation or acknowledge it directly. He chose brazen. "Douglas," he said, the man himself. He said it with the warmth of someone greeting a host rather than a property owner who had arrived to discover his property occupied without permission. "Priscilla said you might be stopping by." I looked at Raymond for a moment. Then I looked at the assembled group, 11 people spread across my patio furniture and my lawn chairs and my picnic table, plates of food from containers they had brought and arranged on my outdoor counter, beverages in my cooler, which they had apparently located in my storage closet and helped themselves to. "Raymond," I said, "I did not say I might be stopping by. I came to check on the property. This is not a social event I was aware of." His expression shifted slightly. He said, Well, Priscilla said the place was available and she has a key, so. I said the key was given to Nathan, not to a general arrangement. Another shift. He said, Doug, come on, it's just a cookout, don't make it a whole thing. The specifics of that sentence, the Doug which I had not given anyone permission to use, the it's just a cookout which minimized what was happening, the don't make it a whole thing which preemptively framed my entirely reasonable response as an overreaction, told me everything I needed to understand about Raymond's framework for this interaction. I said, I am going to call Nathan. Please let your group know I will need about an hour. Then I walked to the far end of the deck and called my son. Nathan answered immediately, and I could tell from the first syllable that he did not know. The quality of surprise in his voice when I described the backyard was genuine, the surprise of a man who has just discovered that something happened in his name without his knowledge or participation. He said, Priscilla didn't tell me she was doing this. I said, I assumed that, which is why I am calling you before I say anything to Raymond that I cannot take back. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Dad, I'm sorry, this is not okay. I said, I know you know that. I need to know what you want me to do in the next hour because I can handle this several ways, and the way I choose is going to shape what comes next for everyone. He said, tell them they need to leave. I'm on my way. I said, Nathan, you do not need to leave work. He said, yes, I do. I will be there in 40 minutes. I said, all right, I will wait. I walked back to the gathering. I said, clearly and to the group rather than just to Raymond, I want to thank everyone for being here. I know Priscilla extended an invitation. I also want to be clear that the invitation was extended without my knowledge and that going forward this property is not available for events I have not been consulted about. I am not asking anyone to leave immediately. Nathan is on his way. We will talk when he arrives. The group absorbed this in various ways. Raymond looked irritated. Glenda looked embarrassed. The cousins looked at their plates. Otto, to his credit, turned down the heat on the grill with the practical acknowledgement of a man who understands the afternoon has changed direction. Priscilla appeared at my shoulder. Douglas, she said. I didn't think it would be a big deal. It's just family. I looked at her. Priscilla, I said, just family is a phrase that tells me who you consider this property to belong to. It does not belong to just family. It belongs to me. She said, I thought we were family. I said, Nathan is my family. The rest of this group are people I have met twice. That is not a statement about them. It is an accurate description of our relationship. She looked at me with something that was working hard to be dignity. I said, let's wait for Nathan. Nathan arrived in 38 minutes. He had made good time from Savannah. He came through the gate with the energy of a man who has been thinking for 38 minutes about what he wants to say and has arrived ready to say it. He hugged me, then he looked at Priscilla. They had a conversation at the far end of the deck that lasted 14 minutes. I know because I was sitting on the porch steps and I was not trying to time it, but it was 14 minutes, and at the end of it Nathan came back and Priscilla went to speak with her family. Nathan sat beside me on the steps. He said, she thought since she had the key it was understood that her family could use the house. I said, that is not what the key means. He said, I know, I have told her that. I said, Nathan, I need to ask you something directly and I need an honest answer. He said, okay. I said, has this happened before? Not necessarily a gathering of this size. But has the house been used by Priscilla's family on occasions when I was not here and was not informed? He was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a man who does not want to answer but has been asked for honesty. He said twice last summer, small things, just her parents for a weekend. I said, did you know in advance? He said, Priscilla told me after. I sat with that. I said, Nathan, the key was for you. Not for a standing arrangement with your wife's family. Every time that house is used without my knowledge, I am being told that my ownership of it is theoretical rather than actual. He said, I understand. I should have addressed it last summer. I said, yes, you should have. He said, what do you need from me? I said, I need the key back. Not permanently. I need it back while we establish what the arrangement actually is going forward. When we have a clear and explicit agreement about how the house is used, I will return it. He looked at the gate. He said, that's fair. The group began clearing out around 5. Not dramatically, not with conflict, just the natural dispersal of an afternoon that had been adjusted. Raymond shook my hand on the way out with the slightly stiff dignity of a man accepting a result he disagrees with. Glenda said it was nice to see me, which was generous given the circumstances. Otto quietly returned my cooler to the storage closet and closed the door behind it. Priscilla was the last to leave, after helping Nathan clean up my patio furniture and collect the food containers. She stopped near the gate and looked at me. Douglas, she said, I really did think it was fine. I said, Priscilla, I believe you thought it was fine. That is the part I want you to think about. Not whether you thought it was fine, but how you arrived at thinking it was fine without asking me. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, I'll think about it. I said, that's all I am asking. I called my attorney on Monday morning. His name is Franklin Webb, and he has handled my legal affairs for 14 years. I told him what had happened on Saturday and what I had discovered about the previous summer. I told him I wanted to review the deed and the property documentation and discuss whether any formal structure would help clarify the usage terms going forward. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Douglas, do you want to do this formally or informally? I said, I want to start informally, but I want to be prepared to do it formally if informal does not hold. He said, I can draft a family property use agreement. Something that specifies access terms, notification requirements, and what constitutes authorized use. It does not have to be adversarial. It can simply be clear. I said clear is exactly what I want. He drafted it over the following week. The document was 3 pages, plain language, covering the following terms. Access to the Tybee Island property required advance notice to me of at least 72 hours for any stay. Extended family, defined as anyone beyond Nathan, required my explicit written approval for each visit. The key held by Nathan was revoked pending signing of the agreement and would be reissued upon signing. A new key would be issued only to Nathan and not to any third party without my written consent. Franklin noted that the document was not legally enforceable as a traditional contract, but was a documented statement of terms that created a record and established expectations. He said, the value of a document like this is not enforcement. It is clarity. People behave differently when the terms are written down and signed. I said, that has been my experience as well. Nathan signed it on a Thursday evening. He came to my house in Savannah and we sat at the kitchen table and he read every page, and he signed at the bottom with the focused attention of a man who understands what he is signing and why it matters. He said, I should have addressed this a year ago. I said, yes, but you are addressing it now. He said, Priscilla is frustrated. She feels like she's being treated as a problem. I said, Priscilla is not a problem. The assumption that my property is available on her terms is a problem. Those are different things and I need her to understand the difference. He said, I will help her understand. I said, I know you will. Priscilla signed 2 weeks later. She came with Nathan, which I appreciated, because it told me she was treating it as something to do together rather than something being done to her. She sat across from me and she read the document and she signed it, and then she looked at me and said, I want to say something. I said, go ahead. She said, I grew up in a family where things were shared without a lot of formality, and I think I brought that into this relationship without understanding that not everyone operates that way. I am not saying that to excuse it. I am saying it because I want you to know I am not trying to take something from you." I said, "Priscilla, I believe that. The agreement is not about what I think you intend. It is about what I need in order to trust that my property is mine." She said, "That's fair." I said, "I appreciate you saying that." We had dinner afterward. The four of us at my kitchen table, Nathan and Priscilla and my neighbor Frances, who had come by with a bottle of wine because she had heard the Tybee story from me on Sunday and said it sounded like a meal rather than a conversation should conclude it. Frances has been my neighbor for 17 years, and she has never once used my property without asking. She told Priscilla, "Douglas is the most generous man on this street. He has lent me tools and helped me move furniture and stayed up late helping me when the plumbing went wrong. The only thing he has never done is offer what he did not intend to give." Priscilla said, "I am learning that." Frances said, "It is good to learn it before it becomes a real problem." We ate. The dinner was good. The conversation found its level gradually, the way conversations find their level when the important things have already been said, and what remains is the easier work of being people who know each other in a room. The Tybee house went back into use the following month. Nathan and Priscilla requested it formally, 72 hours in advance, for a long weekend in August. I approved it. They came and stayed and took care of the property with the specific attention of people who understand that they are guests of someone who has trusted them. When they left, Nathan sent me a photograph. The deck at sunset, the fire pit unlit, the chairs returned to their positions, the gate latched, clean and ordered and exactly as I had built it. He wrote one line under the photograph, "Thank you for trusting us with this." I looked at that photograph for a while. Then I sent back 3 words, "Earn it every time." He sent back a thumbs-up emoji, which I found sufficient. Raymond and Glenda came to the Tybee house in September, with my explicit approval, at my invitation, for a Sunday afternoon. I was there. We grilled on the stone fire pit. Otto was not present, but the spirit of Otto was acknowledged when Raymond mentioned that Otto had said it was a fine piece of property. I told Raymond it was designed to be. We had a pleasant afternoon. Raymond shook my hand at the gate on the way out, a different handshake than the first one. The handshake of a man who has accepted terms he initially resisted and found them, on the other side of acceptance, easier than expected. He said, "Douglas, you run a tight ship." I said, "I spent 31 years with the Army Corps of Engineers. A tight ship is the only kind I know how to run." He almost smiled. He said, "I can respect that." I said, "I know you can." They drove away. I stood at the gate of my property on Tybee Island in the September evening, with the sound of the Atlantic 200 yards to the east, and the smell of charcoal from a fire I had built, and a Saturday afternoon that was entirely mine. Here is what I want to leave you with. Generosity is a value. Shared space is a gift. Trust extended to the people you love is one of the real pleasures of having built something worth sharing. But generosity without clarity produces assumption. Trust without terms produces entitlement. And the man who builds something over a lifetime and then allows it to be used as though it belongs to someone else has not been generous. He has simply been unclear about what belongs to him. Be clear. Put it in writing if you need to. Return the key and reissue it with understood terms. Have the conversation that feels harder than it is, because on the other side of the conversation is an arrangement that actually works, which is considerably better than an arrangement that has been quietly resented for 2 summers. I drove back to Savannah that evening with the windows down and the radio on and the specific satisfaction of a man who has handled something correctly. Not loudly, not dramatically, but correctly. The beach house is mine. The trust I extend is mine to give, and the terms on which I give it are mine to determine. That is the only arrangement I am running. If this story reached you tonight, hit that like button and subscribe to Dad's True Emotions. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. I will see you on the next one.